Okay, I was wondering. This is self-published.
Yeah, and that may explain the what some people have called the really lousy cover, but I need to replace it.
Yeah, well, the background is. I think the cover's okay.
You okay with
The
that?
the editing on is good. Like when I just look at it doesn't look like a self-published book. Like like the margins and everything are great. So
Well, good, good. Yeah, that took me a little bit of work because that was first time I'd ever self-published anything. So it was a learning process.
okay, well, this I know this was a later question I had, but since we're talking about the copyright stuff right now, I guess I gotta throw it out there. Um, is there any big copyright issue with this? Is there royalties you have to pay to someone, or how does it work when you rewrite an old book like this? Because it's
Well,
out of 70 years, right? So,
right, yeah. It published in 1912 in England and in America, but in America it was published in an abbreviated version just to get copyright. And
hmm,
it was called The Dream of X, and it's only about 20,000 words long. So um, basically just kind of a summary of the story. Um, and so there was really a question there. Does that establish copyright? And what made it more confusing whenever I looked at the Valentine books, hard to make that work. Valentine books. I'll keep working on this. I'm going to have to learn
you may
this.
have to hold it right in front of your face. Even then, they just disappear. You fade into the
Okay.
night land.
Okay, we give up on that. It's not important anyway. I'm just holding the Night Land book, but they said that it was this edition published by arrangement with Arkham House, which was a small press publisher that did a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's stuff. And so I contacted Arkham House, thinking, well, maybe they own copyright somehow, and they assured me that they did. Um, and I was like, that just seems unlikely that I mean, I can understand they would have copyright on their own edition, but not necessarily on the work itself. And um, so I started doing some research on it. Um, Fortunately, at the University of Texas in Austin, Texas, the they had at that time you couldn't do internet research on copyright really. You couldn't access those files, and I didn't want to go to Washington D.C. And so I went down to Austin. They had duplicates of all the copyright files, so I actually did research, found and I've kind of forgotten the details on it, but I found where there were copyrights on it, um, and basically was reassured that copyright had expired in the United States as well, and so it was public domain. I did hire an entertainment lawyer, and basically he looked over my research, called me up, and said it looks to me like there is no, in my opinion, there is no copyright here. It's public domain. He says, "Would you like that in writing?" I said, "Yeah, I'd kind of like to have it in writing,
Yeah.
And he said, "Well," he says, "I'll have to charge you $200 to have it
uh,
in writing." So I was
there
like,
you go.
that's fine. Why didn't you just say it's going to cost you $200 and go on? But anyway, that that was it. And now you see lots of copies of the Night Land, the original, on the internet anyway. So
Yeah, yeah. The Project Gutenberg has really opened the doorway there. So
right, yeah. And that was what I used. I did not use the Valentine Books edition because I knew that it had been edited somewhat. So I downloaded an original copy with the full manuscript and used it on my rewrite.
okay, cool. Yeah, when I was comparing the two, I was using the Gutenberg press version also. So I was wondering which one you were originally drawing from. Have you seen or do you own like the 1912 copy? I'm sure there's only like 500 in existence or something like.
Yeah, I have no idea. I've off and on, I've kind of looked for them, but yeah, I don't know. I don't own one. No.
Yeah, you'll have to go scour some old musty bookstores in
Hmm.
England really to find something like that. So
Yeah, he was not terribly popular. So at the time, it did not sell well.
yeah, and that's a good transition to our next question. I've tried to read the original. Actually, I found your version first, and I read it and loved it, and then I went to the original and I went, oh my gosh, I can't read this, right? There's something
Hmm.
about the style of the prose. It's like a little bit like Paradise Lost, but also it's just I don't know, it's extremely hyper focused on the first person in a sense that
Mhm.
like there's so much eye language that it's exhausting to read, I think.
Yeah.
So why did you think he wrote it in that way? What's your theory on, his original, take on this?
I can see Paradise Lost as far as maybe the sense of awe, like when Lucifer is cast down to hell. Um, but as far as the language, I'm not sure. Um, I was reading the travels of Sir John Mandeville um, a couple of years ago, and that sounded a lot like the type of language that Hodgson was using. And that would be probably a good comparison. The travels book is really a pretty dull thing to read, but I managed to make it all the way through. But it's got a lot of wonders, people that look like feet and different things as they sailed around the world. Um, but I think the language, I think Hodgson may have been, and I'm just guessing, may have been influenced by that.
Okay. Um, yeah, I was wondering if and this is I think a later question, but if he was a person who probably had read Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, because those books were coming out around the same time, especially
Mhm.
Jules Verne's were even in the 1870s and 80s, and H.G. Wells was extremely popular, right? He
Right.
even during that time Hodgson was writing probably would have been in Europe traveling around, right? Because he was meeting
Mhm.
with kings and dukes and these kinds of things. So do you think Hodgson was reading these other books and was drawing some kind of inspiration from them, or you think he was doing his own thing?
I no, I think he was. You know, I don't know if you've ever read his book, The House on the Borderland, but it reminds me a lot of H.G. Wells' Time Machine, where he's sitting in the time machine and he's going through the centuries. The sun is rising and falling very quickly, and that kind of thing. On the House of the Borderland, on the House on the Borderland, there's a kind of a similar thing where he's traveling through different dimensions. So I think H.G. Wells was definitely a an influence. I also think that if you look at the literature, the fantasy literature of that time, the English were very much interested in India. That was a prime source of income for them back their English colonies in India. And so, because of that, just like we've become more interested in the Middle East since we had the wars over there, in the same way that they were very interested in India. And so you start to see a lot of reincarnation in a lot of the fantasies. If you read H. Rider Haggard, who was very, very popular, and just different writers in that era, the idea of reincarnation really fascinated them, and it was always the idea of two lovers that been had lost each other back in the past, and then they meet each other in the future.
Yeah, I could see that sort of Victorian or Edwardian sense of romance, right? Sort of like
Mhm.
fusing with, the Indian or, ideas of reincarnation. Um, yeah, that's very fascinating. I definitely think there's something there that is worth looking into. Um,
There
another
was
question.
a
Yeah, go ahead.
I just might mention there's a scene that I actually took out of the Night Land in the first chapter where Andrew and Meredith are talking, and they begin to talk about different things, different dreams they've had, and what it suggests there is that they've had multiple past lives. It's really a pretty part of the book, but I thought that kind of dilutes the idea that these two people are going to meet each other a million years from now. Um, and so I removed that with some angst
Hmm,
at changing his work. I thought, let's just keep it simple, that this is a strangeness that's just happened to these two people.
okay. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about not necessarily style, but shaping of the actual book itself. Because my presentation that's going to be at NEMLA next month is I call your rewrite of it as kind of sharpening. Um,
Mm.
there's something about Hodgson's version that's very blurry, and then your version to me is like very clear. And so I think that's done at the sentence level where you're changing a lot of mechanisms of how the sentences work, but also you're restructuring scenes and you're changing. And a big addition was dialogue, right? In addition to
Right.
naming the character Andros, right, or Andrew.
Yes.
And so and I'm sure there's a lot you can talk about there. So I'm just jump in
Mhm.
wherever you feel is most appropriate for the rewrite.
When I first started rewriting it, I tried just doing a direct translation, if you will, just changing the these and thous, and what I ended up with was this really redundant, uh, more modern sounding language, but still, I thought this doesn't work. I have to write it not sentence by sentence, but paragraph by paragraph,
Hmm.
and scene by scene. And so that was part of it. The dialogue was huge, as far as trying to create some kind of characterization, because Hodgson was working in a patriarchic society. And so Nani in the original, really, she was brave, she was beautiful, but there wasn't much character there otherwise. And so dialogue was really necessary to bring about that sharpening of character for sure. Um, so yeah, I think that was part of it. I will say that I lost a little bit of the awe, I
Hmm.
think, from the original. That redundancy that Hodgson put in there, repeating things and then doing that odd language that he was doing, this archaic language, gave, especially in the first scene, where he's looking out across the pyramid at the Night Land. There's all these monsters out there. Um, I think I couldn't quite keep the awe that he created with all those words. And I knew it at the time. I thought, well, you can only do so much. I've got to trade clarity um, for awe in this
Yeah,
case.
interesting. There's a little bit of loss there. Because actually, when I wrote a paper on your book, I compared it to the Surrealist Manifesto because there is the very surreal, dreamlike quality, especially at the beginning of the book, right? As we're looking out
Mhm.
over the Nightland and we're describing all of these different features of it. Um, there's almost like a carnival-esque kind of a quality to it where I just can keep eating the popcorn. I can keep eating the
Yep.
cotton candy of the Nightland. Um, I wonder, did you have to dial any of that back, or did you pretty much leave everything in there that was in the original?
Uh, Pretty much everything. Every chapter was kind of a challenge. For example, that the scene you were just talking about, where they're looking or he is looking out over the Nightland. Um, he When Hodgson wrote that thing, he didn't go around in a circle. He he started on one side and went over to the other side of the pyramid and then went forward and then back. Um, and so I thought, well, that's not easy. And so I had to put it in a circle. I felt like this will be a little clearer to the readers. Um, and so that was just an example of trying to bring clarity.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's fascinating. Yeah, because I feel like when I've read both the scenes and I didn't even notice that you're seeing, yeah, you could almost pick it out like a clock, right? This is over here, and this is over here, and this is over here. And people have made on the internet these really cool maps, right, of the
oh yeah,
Nightland.
much better than the one I have in the book, actually. Yes.
You'll have to throw them a fiver, right, or whatever for when you do the second version with the new, cover. So,
Uh-huh.
um,